Sup? Welcome back to my channel. If you like talking all things bookish with me, feel free to like and subscribe down below. I'm going to be going over the rest of my Pride Month reading recs, and these are all of the books that are not fantasy, or like mostly not fantasy. There are 2 books on here where fantasy is like probably the top subgenre, but something else supersedes it. Anyway, these are my non-fantasy Pride Month reading recs.
Begin.
The first one on this list is probably my #1 book that I read last year, and that's The Space Between Worlds. And this has lesbian and bi representation in it. I think there might also be some side characters that might be gay or trans, but it's been over a year since I've read it, so I'm a little bit hazy on more of those secondary characters. But this is a debut novel, and it's so beautifully written. It is working in a world where there are multiverses, and they've discovered multiverse travel, and so they can go to other worlds that mimic their own, but only if it's close enough. And so as soon as a world diverges too much from their own world, they can't really travel there anymore. The only catch is, if you are to travel to a world where a copy of you exists, reality doesn't like that, and you'll probably die because that person has more of a hold and claim to the world that they were born in, and you as the interloper don't. But reality does not like the existence of the 2 of you in the same space, so yeah, you're gonna die. You're never gonna make it home. You're never gonna explore. Half hour and that's it. And the main character that we're following with is possibly the most rare person in their universe, because I think at the start of the book there are only 8 copies of her that exist in any of the explored worlds. So she can basically travel everywhere because no copy of her actually lives there. And she's honestly a bit of a disaster human and a disaster gay. It is such a fun ride. I really enjoyed her character, but also I think the author excelled at the themes that she presented. We're looking a lot at past relationships, trauma and abuse and forgiveness, and also a lot about power structures and almost capitalism, because there are the haves and the have-nots. And the city that she's in is the have city, but she's kind of there as a have-not, and almost like a second-class citizen within the have city. And so looking at that, the power structures and dynamics, the hierarchy within each location, and how it's mirrored throughout the world, I think she does an excellent job showing variations on the same themes that she's exploring. So the side characters will be going through various plots that are similar to the main themes being explored, but like a different facet, and you can also see it mirrored in the different worlds and how other things might have played out differently. And so all in all, it's such a wonderful standalone. It does look like they might be having like another book in this world. It's unclear if it's going to be a sequel. It probably won't, because I think this wrapped up really satisfyingly, but really, really good. Can't recommend enough. The other sci-fi on this list is the Leightonverse. These are Fina and Defect, and they're just little short novellas. The author is non-binary, so this is an own voices work. The first book follows with a non-binary character, and the second book follows with, I honestly don't know how to describe them, but there is some like bi and pan possibly representation there. But Leightonverse all takes place in this world. It's definitely not IKEA. Totally not copyright IKEA. So anyway, they work for IKEA, and because of the layouts of IKEAs, and they have like all of those circumnavigated routes and all that sort of thing, it's really prone to portals. And I guess all of my sci-fi on this list are going to be kind of multiverse related, and so there will be just like a tear between different dimensions where the worlds can kind of bleed together. And so sometimes that means that the furniture is alive, and it'll have like little pincers or scuttling around and watching you, swallowing you, that sort of thing. But also sometimes a portal will open, and if a customer gets sucked into it, into a different world, it's up to the minimum wage employees of IKEA to go and track them down. The first book is very much like a fun romp where it's very reminiscent of those like old adventure books where you're going possibly on like a ship and traveling and maybe going to all these different islands and seeing different cultures, except they're doing it through the multiverse with a company branded gun that they're able to use for portals and things. And it's such a good fun time as they're chasing down this lost customer. The second book is the very best employee of the month type of guy, and he needs to stay after hours, and when he does so, his name is Derek, and he meets the specialized team who's there to help him controlling all of these like outbreaks within the IKEA. And all 4 of that team are also daring. It's a very fun series. It doesn't take itself too seriously. It's got a lot of commentary on capitalism and the type of like production and stuff that we have now, but also just a really great sci-fi romp. And getting into more of my thrillers, the first one is The Girls I've Been, and this is one of my favorite books from last year, possibly my favorite YA that I've ever read. It is so excellently done. We have the main character is bi, and her girlfriend and her ex-boyfriend, currently best friend, the three of them are all at the bank, and they're gonna deliver this money for like a charity, and while they're there, there's a heist, so they become hostages. And they're kind of separated from all of the adults. There's one other child who's there, and they're all separated, and they have to figure out how to get out of this because it's very high stakes. There's a lot of intense action, and the book kind of reminds me of like White Oleander, which is a really old movie I watched on TV in like the 2000s, but we're flashing back in between to the backstory of her life because our main character has quite an interesting history, and the different ways that those experiences have helped train her to be able to do the things that she's able to do in our present day without just like automatically, you know, fight or flight, getting totally locked up and helpless in this event. I think the characters are really fun, and they're also written in a very believable way. They both seem like their age. A lot of them have experienced past trauma. There's some disability rep in this as well, and that possibly shapes them to be on the more mature end of their age. Like, if it's a spectrum, you know, and everybody in their age group, they're on the more mature side. But they still feel very much like, yeah, those are teenagers. They're not 20 or 30 years old with this, like, grand list of skills that's totally unbelievable. It all seems internally consistent. And I just think that the writing is a little bit sassy, a little bit snarky. It's very fun, and there's a lot of action. I think that both the flashbacks and the present-day stories are equally compelling. There was never a moment where I was like, oh no, we're gonna switch perspectives again, because I'm just excited for everything that comes next. I absolutely adore this book. Even if you're not into YA, definitely pick it up. I don't think it has like all of those YA tropes, but it just does feel very accessibly written. The other thriller here is They Never Learn, and this is a book where we're following along with two POVs. One is a college student, and one is a female serial killer who she works on this college campus, and every year she decides who the worst man on campus is, and then she kills him. And mostly this is related to like sex crimes and sexual assault type of things. I really like following along from a serial killer's point of view. I don't think that this book was like perfect, but I did enjoy my time with it, and I know that a lot of other people on BookTube have absolutely loved it, so I feel really comfortable having this as a recommendation here. But there's lesbian and bi representation, and yeah, just some good fun time hating on some terrible men. Vigilante justice. And then the next book is like, I mean, you could kind of say fantasy, but really this is a horror book. And it's horror YA, so I think that it's not too over the top in gore or anything. But the author honestly just went, oh, that's a horror trope? Yeah, throw it in. We've got everything. So this book is told in two timelines. There's a girl and she's being interrogated by police, and then also there's a timeline with her and her friends. Her sister has been missing, and it's been at least a year. I don't remember if it's been longer, but like the date she went missing is really important because there's an urban legend, and they're gonna go and try to enact this like little ritual, almost like a Bloody Mary type of urban legend, to get her sister back. And this book just has everything. There are ghosts, there are curses, there are creepy religions, and there's body horror, there's violence, there's murder, there's a haunted house, there's monsters, there's just like everything. You want Lovecraftian horror? We've even got that. Just throw the kitchen sink in, all the different horror things, but I really think it worked. Like, all of the elements in this kind of blend together, and it was really, really good. I did listen to it solely on audiobook, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend that because there's at least one chapter where they're going through just a ton of like text message history, and the narrator will read the time stamp for every single message, like the date and time, even if the whole message is just yep or cool. And wow, just hearing the exact same date and time back to back with very little differentiation between it's grating. I would recommend, at least for that section, going with the physical book instead of the audio, but other than that I have no complaints, and it was just a really solid read and just this feels like the quintessential horror Halloween type of book for me. What kind of Pride Month reading recommendation list would be complete without The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo? And as much as that title sounds just like the most heterosexual thing in the world, it actually has a lot of lesbian, gay, and bisexual representation in this. It is a historical fiction, and I'm not one who loves historical fiction. This basically has all of my anti-buzzwords, but it's such a good book. And so I would say, even if you're not interested, pick it up anyway, because like, odds are you will like it. Most people give this a 5 stars, even when it's not their preferred genre of choice. But this is golden age, like Hollywood, and a lot of the actors are being, they're more than just their on-screen presence, so their lives are kind of like managed and they have to present in a certain way. And that can mean like a lot of closeted lifestyles. But honestly, the writing here is just so good. Evelyn Hugo herself is like such a firecracker of a character, and hearing her delivering her own story and just the way that she does it, I want her to tell me everything. She's so sassy and unrepentant, and it's really wonderful. She's such an interesting character, so I definitely recommend that. For a YA contemporary type of read, I have Felix Ever After, and this is following along with Felix, who is a trans boy, and there is some gay representation as well. I think there might have like a little bit of lesbian and bisexual in the secondary cast, but this is kind of his journey, and he's a high school student. He's going to art school right now, hoping to get into these really advanced like art programs for college. There's a little bit about class and race and wealth and privilege in there, but mostly this is a story about him. And I mean, I think everyone remembers being a teenager and being very focused on wanting to have your first romantic relationship, especially hard because he is trans, and sometimes there's a little bit of bullying that goes along with that. I don't think that the like triggers for this are super severe, and as the title implies, it's kind of more of a happily ever after, Felix Ever After ending, but there is a little bit along the way, so I would say to be conscious of that. But I think it does a really good job of exploring Felix's gender, and also how that gender journey may not be over, and how they interact with the world. Even in this very liberal and artistic type of community, there is some internalized misogyny and hate against him, especially for being trans. And I think that the way that it's handled is very good. They definitely feel like teenagers, they talk like teenagers, they act like teenagers, but the book is really good and interesting. I honestly don't know how to categorize pet. I would say like fantasy is kind of strong as a subgenre, but also it's got a bit of that magical realism vibe rather than actual fantasy. Literary fiction feels pretty good, but this is following along with a trans main character. And one of the things that I love most about this is that it doesn't matter that she's trans. Like, we go over it briefly in the beginning and letting you know that that's who she is, but it's not important, and it's definitely not at the forefront of this. For such a small, light little book, like this tiny little novella has some pretty heavy themes that we're discussing throughout, because we're looking at like child abuse as the main subject matter. And while the main character herself is not disabled in any way, she does have an aversion to speaking and has throughout her life, and so she's mostly nonverbal, or like maybe 50-50, but I think it leans much stronger toward the nonverbal side even throughout the book. And the people in her life have also learned sign language to be able to communicate with her, and so I just liked that inclusivity. We're also dealing with a lot of Black communities, and many of them are immigrants. I think that the narrator does a fantastic job really bringing these dialects to life and being able to give them like all the different accents, so it sounds a lot more natural, whereas like it can be a little choppy if you're just reading the text. But just fantastic, fantastically well done. I loved everything about this book. I was kind of nervous going into it, but it's so beautifully written, and I think it handles the subject matter really well and respectfully, and just is a really different and interesting way of exploring that. And the last two on this list are YA, graphic novels, and just super happy and delightful and warm. Because I think you need a little bit of variety. You know, sometimes you want that horror spice, sometimes you want a thriller, and sometimes you just want something that's really sweet and fluffy. So the first series is Heartstopper, and this has currently 4 volumes out right now, and it just got a Netflix adaptation. I believe that season 1 is supposed to correlate directly with volume 1. And this is following Nick and Charlie and their budding relationship. These are high school boys in the UK, and Charlie is gay. and he was outed by classmates, and that was a really difficult time for him last year. And Nick is just starting to realize that maybe he is bi. There's a lot of inclusive identities in the supporting cast as well. At their sister school, they have some lesbians and some trans girls, and in the show they actually have the trans actress is trans herself. But it's very sweet, and a lot of people absolutely love this series. I wish for me personally that it get a little bit deeper and more nuanced. I think that as a YA, and especially like being more on the younger end and a little bit more inclusive, it doesn't get quite as impactful as I would want from my like plot line. But it is very sweet and fun. It's also freely available as a webcomic online, and it does get into a little bit of like eating disorders and stuff as well, so be aware of that if that is a trigger for you. But I think that it handles it really respectfully, and the author goes out of her way to make sure that there's a little bit of advice and like a lot of resources that are provided for if you have an eating disorder or someone in your life does. And so I thought that that was really thoughtful. And then lastly, like, okay, so this isn't necessarily LGBT. I don't think that any characters are explicitly called such on page, but it is gender non-conforming, and I do think that the LGBT community has a long-standing tradition with drag. And this is very similar to like that drag queen kind of thing. This is a tailor, and the prince really likes to dress up as a woman. He likes to put on dresses and have his hair done and all his makeup and nails and everything, and he needs to team up with her to make these secret wardrobes that he can wear, because that's how he really likes to express himself. And I just thought that this book was so much fun. I absolutely love it. There was at least one moment that had me like shocked and cackling and so much fun. It's really, really short. Both of these, the graphic novels, you can probably get through one volume in like 30 to 60 minutes. Like, they're not long at all, so it's definitely not a time commitment if you find that you're not vibing with it. Like, it's really easy to put it down or just finish it, because it's basically the same time either way. But it was just one of the most fun and delightful things that I've read, so I would definitely say check out The Prince and the Dressmaker. But that sums up all of my Pride Month reading recs. Let me know if you've read any of these books or which one you're most excited to pick up, and I will catch you in the next one.
Oh, hi.